3 men were sharing my life crumbling before me. As I stepped into the restaurant, scanning the room for my date, my eyes unexpectedly landed on my ex-wife, Eve. She was seated next to a wealthy, middle-aged man who had clearly indulged himself over the years. Eve looked completely at ease beside him, her laughter echoing through the crowded space. Memories of our life together flooded back. Although it had been 3 years since our divorce, the emotions felt as raw and painful as if it had happened yesterday. This was the first date I had had in 3 years, and I couldn't believe my luck, running into Eve. My date, Lisa, noticed my sudden distraction and followed my gaze. She gently touched my arm, bringing me back to the present. Let me tell you where it all began. I had planned a golf trip with my friends. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, a chance to unwind and forget about the complications of life. However, when we arrived at the airport, we were met with disappointing news. The flight had been canceled and there wouldn't be another one until the next evening. We were going to miss a day and a half of golf and the competition. With heavy hearts, we decided to cancel the trip and reschedule for a couple of months later. The competitions were just friendly gatherings held every month, but the disappointment was palpable. As I walked into the house, the sight of clothes scattered across the living room floor immediately raised red flags. Standing there, a sinking feeling washed over me as I realized the sounds I heard were far from innocent. My wife's moans were unmistakably those of pleasure, not distress. My heart sank as the harsh reality hit me. Eve was cheating on me. I knew I had to confront whatever was going on upstairs. My pulse quickened as I quietly ascended the staircase, each step heavy with dread. Peeking through the gap in our bedroom door, I was met with a sight that made my stomach churn. There she was, surrounded by 3 men. 2 of them I recognized, her boss, Henry, and her colleague, Mark. My hatred for Henry began when he would always buy her expensive gifts, which Eve dismissed as bonuses for her hard work. Now I knew the gifts meant something entirely different. Both of these men had wives and children. They had my wife involved in acts that ignited a fierce anger within me. Using foul words and an air of superiority, they humiliated her. As I watched, a mix of wrath and disgust washed over me. I couldn't make sense of this woman as the same Eve I'd known for a decade. I had to think fast. I wanted to storm into the room, punch them all, and tell them to get off my wife, but I knew I had to be clever about this. I quietly withdrew, tiptoed downstairs, and took cover in my study thinking of a plan. I reached for my phone. My goal was to record these minutes of agony before my feelings overcame me and capture this betrayal. Such a scene might arouse some people, but for me it was a nightmare come true, making me feel deeply saddened and betrayed. I went to my study to get my thoughts straight after feeling completely destroyed. I unlocked the safe, removed my gun, and turned off the safety just in case. I wasn't usually violent, but there was an overwhelming need to take back control. Heading back to the living room, I collected the car keys from the discarded pants on the floor. I checked the wallets to see whose pants were whose. I found Henry's, Eve's boss's pants and put them in the trash. I then went outside and deflated the tires of all the cars, including Eve's. I had noticed Eve's cell phone on the bedside table while recording. I left via the back door and through the side gate in the garden. Then I called Eve's phone. I didn't think she was going to answer as the phone nearly ran out, but she did. I asked her why she was so out of breath. She told me she had left her phone upstairs and was in the living room watching TV. I was sure I could hear faint laughter in the background. I explained about the golf trip and that I had picked up some food for us and would be home shortly. I headed back to the garden, knowing that all the men would soon be looking for their belongings. I entered back into the house via the side door and started to approach the living room. As I suspected, they were all running around like headless chickens. I could hear Henry shouting profanities at Eve while standing there in no pants or underwear. I pulled out the camera again to make sure to record his shame. The remaining men quickly dressed. Mark was forced to give Henry his boxer shorts, while Eve threw on some clothes. As they all scrambled to leave, she slipped on her shoes and jacket, glancing outside, hoping they'd be gone before I arrived. If she hadn't been so flustered, she might have noticed my car parked down the street. As soon as they left, I revealed myself to Eve. She jumped and asked how long I had been standing there for. I told her long enough. The door started banging, and men were shouting that their tires were flat. I questioned who was at the door, knowing full well who it was. As soon as Eve opened the door, there were flashing lights coming up the drive. The police informed us that a neighbor had called, providing my name and address, and that there was a disturbance. As the officers questioned Eve, I stepped forward, insisting that my wife had been assaulted by the men and demanding their arrest. The men immediately protested, claiming they were invited and that everything was consensual. All eyes turned to Eve, waiting for her to confirm or deny. Avoiding eye contact, she shamefully admitted that she had indeed invited the men and willingly participated. The men visibly relaxed, relieved to avoid any charges. The senior officer then told me that since Eve had invited these men, and they were all consenting adults, there was little they could do legally. He suggested counseling. My eyes filled with disdain as I looked at Eve. I instructed the police to call a taxi for Eve, stating that she wasn't allowed back in the house. Eve and the officer both looked at me. I reminded Eve that when Henry called her a slut, she seemed to enjoy his words then, and honestly, it fits. From now on, I will refer to her as Slugbag and never use her real name again. If she needs to communicate with me, she can do it through Chad, my lawyer. After that, I returned inside and secured the door. The stench of sex that lingered in my bedroom upon my return only served to inflame my anger. In my hysterical rampage across the room, I threw the mattress onto the grass and ripped the bed frame to pieces, also discarding them outdoors. The debris in the bedroom reflected my broken life. I started going through Eve's messages and contacts after I took her phone. I was not surprised to see repulsive correspondence, images and videos of her with several males. It was obvious that she had close relationships with every one of them. When I realized how foolish I had been, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I had finally overcome my stupidity. After retrieving her possessions from the bedroom, I hurled them onto the front lawn. Even more of her belongings were in the guest room. I discovered multiple USB sticks concealed beneath the last drawer as I was emptying it. Pulling my laptop out of the study, I connected the USB drives. A second time, my heart fell. Every time I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. At Tanya's place, the USBs revealed shocking footage of Eve and her friend Tanya engaging in explicit activities with various individuals. As I watched, my eyes began to water with a mix of anger and disbelief. The video continued until it showed Eve with her personal trainer, initially demonstrating exercises. What started as a standard session quickly turned into something else entirely. The session morphed into a role-play scenario where Eve pretended to be confused about an exercise, prompting her trainer to offer assistance. It wasn't long before their interaction turned intimate, with Eve bent over the bench press. The fact that I had been paying for this service only added to my humiliation. It suddenly made perfect sense why Eve was always too exhausted for intimacy after her sessions. I wrapped her phone, USBs, and a copy of the video I had previously shot into a big envelope with care. With my best friend Chad, one of the few people I trusted as my lawyer, I intended to give it all to him. I turned on Eve's computer and transferred all of the files, emails, pictures, and videos to external disks. I was relentless, and it took an hour. I took a seat to go through her digital archive after that. Along with obscene photographs, I discovered videos that looked like those on the USBs. I discovered more of her betrayal as I dug deeper, and found emails from the previous 6 months concealed under fictitious file names. I found emails that were sent with Tanya, and between Eve, Henry, and a few other men. A specific email almost broke me. For a fleeting moment, I contemplated retrieving my gun, but I quickly realized she wasn't worth it. I needed to stay strong. It was an email from Tanya to Eve that truly shattered me. Tanya had asked Eve about her ideal future husband and why she hadn't left me yet. Eve's response was brutally honest and cutting. "I'm done with Lucas," she wrote. "Though foolish, he is loyal. I suspect he's close to discovering my double life. He's not exactly blind, but love blinds him. He's been gaining weight lately, and compared to other men, his growing gut is quite unattractive. He lacks in many areas. His mustache and beard make him look repulsive, and I can't stand them. I used to be fond of him. I used to care. But the thrill of the past few years is something I can't give up. His best friend Chad might be an issue if he starts to interfere. Henry's constant teasing about promotions and bonuses keeps things interesting. I've got my sights set on a new car and a house. If I play my cards right, I can secure a generous monthly alimony. Now that my STD has cleared up, I'm eagerly anticipating our Tuesday celebration. I still can't believe my personal trainer gave me chlamydia. Great in bed, but what a careless mistake. Please send me the footage from last Thursday. It was my first time with so many men. My ideal man should be wealthy, obedient, and not too bright. He should fulfill my every desire without question. As long as the bank account is full, the bedroom doesn't matter. And that makes me laugh. I can get my needs met elsewhere. Sometimes it's just too easy. Oh no, Lucas is home now. Gotta run. Catch you on Tuesday. Call me. Each line of the email was more disgusting than the last. My heart broke as I realized she had been deceiving me for over 2 years while harboring such contempt for me. Had I been entirely oblivious? Consumed by mental anguish and fatigue, I finally collapsed onto the couch and slipped into a restless sleep. The fear of possibly having contracted a sexually transmitted infection from Eve lingered in my mind, haunting me. After a sleepless night, I decided to call in sick to work the next morning. My first call was to a health clinic to get myself checked out, fearing the worst after everything I had discovered. Once I had the appointment scheduled, I reached out to my good friend and lawyer, Chad. His secretary, Sandra, answered. She had been part of my life for nearly as long as Chad. I urgently requested a meeting, but Sandra informed me that Chad would be in court all day. However, after conveying my distress, Chad instructed Sandra to set up a time for me within the hour. My cell rang, the screen flashing with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, half expecting it to be Chad. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Lucas, it's Henry, Eve's boss. What happened at your place last night is something I would like to discuss. Could we meet in my office today?" I couldn't be sure if he knew about the video showing him with my wife, but I suspected he was worried about losing key clients. To Henry, Mark, and Eve were valuable assets he wanted to retain. The potential for bad press was likely another major concern. I arrived at Chad's office, where he had been reviewing the evidence I had gathered. He wanted time to assess the gravity of the situation before discussing our next steps. After an hour, he called me into his office, his expression grave. "Lucas, the evidence you have against Eve and her bosses puts them in a precarious legal position," Chad explained. "Once Henry realizes how strong our case is, he'll likely push for a settlement to avoid further damage." He paused for a moment, gauging my reaction. "Have you watched all the footage?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not all of it. I couldn't handle it. Watching it made me want to cause serious harm to Eve and those men." Chad nodded, understanding the turmoil I was in. "Brace yourself for this," he continued, his tone turning serious. After Eve's session with her personal trainer, a small crowd gathered in the men's locker room. I could hardly believe what he was saying, but Chad pointed to the screen on his desk. It's shocking, but she allowed the other men who were watching to join in after her PT session. I'm not showing you this to upset you, but to reveal the kind of person we're dealing with, Chad explained. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding as the reality of Eve's betrayal unfolded before me. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about the depths of her deception and the risks she was willing to take. The room was silent as I absorbed the implications. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about Eve. The weight of the situation settled heavily on my shoulders as I realized the full extent of what I was up against. If it's less than $2 million, he can forget it, Chad had stated firmly. Let's aim for $2.5 million, I replied. Trying to lighten the mood, I added, I've seen your legal bills before. Henry and I scheduled a 2 p.m. appointment. The showdown was set. We arrived at Henry's office and settled into the plush seats of the reception area. The place exuded luxury, with soft leather sofas and expensive artwork adorning the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Turning slightly, I caught sight of a familiar face disappearing around the corner. Eve. A wave of relief washed over me. I wouldn't have to face her today. Soon we were ushered into Henry's opulent office. The room was a testament to his success, filled with luxurious furniture, awards, and family photos. I wondered how many times Eve had been here, entangled in his web of deceit. Hello, Henry. This is my friend Chad, my lawyer. He'll be joining us today, I said, shaking hands with Henry. Henry nodded curtly, clearly dismayed by Chad's presence, yet continued addressing me as if Chad weren't there. This only made Chad smile, knowing he was getting under Henry's skin. I think it would be prudent to have Mark here too, considering this situation involves him as well, I suggested. Henry paused, then pressed the intercom. Julie, tell Mark to come to my office immediately. Drop everything. While we waited, Henry attempted to feign sincerity. I want to apologize for the trouble Mark and Eve have caused you. Last night must have been awful, but perhaps we can find a resolution that benefits everyone, he said, trying to sound optimistic. What exactly do you mean, Henry? I asked, buying time until Mark arrived. I genuinely care for Eve, Henry began, but Mark's entrance interrupted him. Mark hesitated in the doorway, looking like he wanted to bolt, but Henry motioned for him to sit down. Reluctantly, Mark took a seat, avoiding my gaze. Lucas, I want you to know I care for Eve like a daughter, Henry said. Chad jumped in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. A penchant for incest, Henry. Quite the confession. I couldn't help but chuckle, catching Chad's point. Henry bristled. What are you accusing me of? Incest. What is this? I leaned in, a smug grin on my face. Let's start with the fact that you were in my house with my wife, Henry, and you left without your trousers. I pulled out his trousers from my bag and tossed them onto his desk. The color drained from Henry's face. I think this deserves a visual aid, Chad said, opening his laptop. He placed it on Henry's desk, showing stills from the video of Henry and Mark with Eve in compromising positions. These screenshots are from the video you're about to see, Chad continued, handing the images to Mark, who reluctantly passed them to Henry. Henry stared at the photos, his face pale. He probably recognized his own boardroom table in the shots. Are you telling me you recorded this and shared it? Henry stammered, nearly speechless. Mark sat there, too stunned to speak. Here's how this will work, Henry, Chad began, savoring the moment. Firstly, Eve keeps her job. Lucas thinks she'll need it, and frankly, she fits in well here, Chad said with a knowing smile. Secondly, Mark is out. He pointed at the dumbfounded Mark. Thirdly, you will make us a financial offer that respects our intelligence. We'll consider your proposal and respond within 5 business days. If not satisfied, we might pursue legal action within 2 months. Before either man could react, Chad hit play on the video. The screen filled with footage of Henry and Mark engaging in acts with Eve in the boardroom. Henry watched, shocked and horrified, while Mark looked away, already familiar with what was coming. I could see the wheels turning in Henry's mind as he contemplated how to salvage his business, family, and finances from the impending disaster. We decided that we weren't likely to get much from Eve's PT, Stephen. Therefore, I took it upon myself to deliver photos to the wife of Stephen and also some of the men I had noticed from the locker room. It wasn't long before Henry had offered nearly $2.7 million. Mark found himself jobless as Henry swiftly fired him. I gave Eve a house and a car as she wanted. I saw her only twice in court. Both times I called her a slug bag, which made her cry. I often wondered why she cried now, but not before causing such chaos in my life. Following Chad's advice, I ended up with more money than I ever imagined, though the pain still lingered, haunting me to this day. Lost in my thoughts, the challenges of that dreadful year replayed in my mind like a relentless loop. I was so absorbed in contemplation that I didn't even realize my date, Lisa, was speaking to me the entire time. Her voice finally cut through my reverie, jolting me back to reality as she asked with a hint of concern if I was all right. Unsure how long I had stood there, I shook my head to clear it and returned to the present. Sorry, just lost in some old memories. Thanks, I said to Lisa. I asked her to head to the bar and order us both a drink on a tab and assured her that I'd join her shortly. There was something I needed to do first. With renewed determination, I headed straight for my ex-wife's table. The shock on her face was palpable. The last time Eve had seen me, I was overweight, with long hair and a beard, still nursing an old knee injury from my basketball days. That injury had become my excuse for everything, a crutch to lean on as I settled into a complacent life with her. But now, standing before her, I was a different man. My hair was cut short, my body lean and strong from months of dedicated workouts. Thanks to the settlement, my knee was repaired, and I was back on my feet, both literally and figuratively. I wore a tailored suit that spoke of sophistication and confidence. I had transformed into someone who not only felt good, but looked good too. I decided to break the ice. You look stunning today, slugbag. It's easy to forget how captivating you can be, I said, my voice dripping with provocation. My name is Eve, Lucas. Why can't you call me by my name? She retorted, visibly agitated. I didn't give you the nickname slugbag. You know who did. I just think it suits you. I warned you 3 years ago when you broke my heart, I said, watching her closely for a reaction. The man beside her shifted in his seat, ready to come to her defense, but she gestured for him to remain seated. Her eyes began to glisten with tears, smudging her carefully applied makeup. Go fix your makeup, Eve. I'll handle this jerk, her boyfriend interjected. With those words, she stood up, locking her gaze with mine, tears cascading down her cheeks. Her reaction surprised me. I hadn't expected any lingering feelings. Maybe it was just guilt. I expect you to be gone when I return, she said, her voice trembling before heading to the restroom. As she wiped her eyes, I caught sight of a massive engagement ring on her finger. You must be Lucas, Eve's ex-husband, he said with a sneer, a palpable hostility in his voice. Indeed, and you must be the new man she's been dreaming about, I replied, matching his intensity. I am Eve's fiancé. I'd suggest you watch your language, he cautioned, clearly trying to prevent a scene. I only have a few questions, and then I'll be out of your life for good, I told him, noticing his confused look. I've been in your shoes, and I don't want anyone else to experience what I did. I'm sure she's painted me as a horrible husband, abusive, neglectful, or a womanizer. But I'm not here to change your view of me. First question. Does Tanya still host her Avon gatherings on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Eve helps Tanya with her decor sales on Mondays and Wednesdays. You must be getting forgetful, he replied smugly. Okay then. Does she still have a PT on Saturdays? I inquired. Eve has her PT sessions on Sundays. You really don't remember much for someone who was married to her for so long, he said triumphantly. Final question. Have you ever looked under the bottom drawer of the dresser in your home? I asked, leaning in. No, why would I? He said, baffled. The 3 questions I asked are the reason we're no longer together. I've kept all the divorce paperwork, emails between Eve and Tanya, and hours of footage. I've carried these with me for 3 years, and I thought you should have them, I explained, pulling a well-worn piece of paper from my wallet. This is what Eve wrote to Tanya when she asked how to get rid of me before I found out about her cheating. After reading that letter, I realized I didn't know Eve at all. But it's all centered around you, I said, handing him the paper. I knew Eve's habits like the back of my hand. She always adhered to the same routine, almost to the point of obsession. I suspected that even with a new man, she'd fall back into her old patterns. He hesitated, but then succumbed to curiosity. He unfolded the letter and read it slowly. I had carried it with me for 3 years, rereading it from time to time as a reminder to improve myself, so that no woman would ever write such things about me again. Of all the evidence, that letter was the most piercing, which is why I had kept it. He read the letter, then set it down quickly, scrawling a note on it before storming out of the restaurant without a word or a thank you. His face was a mask of shock. I leaned over to see what he had written. I'll be back soon. Please wait here. I need to check under the bottom drawer of the dressers. Adam. Before leaving, I glanced back at the table where Eve had just returned, searching for Adam. As she sat down, she noticed the letter and Adam's note. Her face turned ashen as she read them, and the last sight I had of my ex-wife was her sobbing so fiercely that everyone in the restaurant turned to stare. I felt a twinge of pity, but mostly indifference. That was my final encounter with her, though I still wonder if Adam found anything under the dresser drawer. Eve's tears suggested he might have. As I stepped outside, the warm summer breeze hit my face, a welcome contrast to the cold, clinical air inside the restaurant. My thoughts raced, but a sense of closure began to settle in. The past few years had been a journey of pain and transformation. But now, standing here, I felt a liberation that had eluded me for so long. Taking a deep breath, I made my way back to the bar where Lisa was waiting. As I approached, she looked up with concern etched on her face. Is everything okay? She asked softly, sensing the change in my demeanor. Yeah, I replied, offering a reassuring smile. Everything's better than okay. She handed me a drink, and we clinked glasses. As I sat beside her, I realized how much I had learned from this ordeal. Trust, once shattered, is hard to rebuild, but I was ready to try. Ready to embrace life again with someone new. Lisa and I spent the rest of the evening talking and laughing, the tension from earlier fading away. Confronting my past had finally freed me to be truly present in the moment. I felt lighter and more grounded, as if the weights had finally been lifted from my shoulders. If you reach the end of the story, thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your comments below.